What's up, San Diego? Good morning to you on a Sunday in June. June gloom in full force out there in America's finest. Hopefully, most of it burns off. Everybody that's going down to the ballpark today, going down to Petco Park to watch on this Padres team that has turned around the last couple of days. It's been good to see. A lot better than last week. The 5-game losing streak has finally been snapped, playing a lot better baseball as of late. And we'll see what the Padres have in store today as they take on the Arizona Diamondbacks for the 4th time this weekend. Padres have really done a good job against the Rattlebacks all season. They haven't been very good, Arizona. And I'm not really a big believer in Arizona, but as of right now, where everybody is at, this is a very important game to a very important series for the San Diego Padres because of how everything is stacking up in the National League wildcard standings. If I pull up the wildcard standings on my phone or on the computer, whatever, it is a wild, wild west, or really, National League in the wild card. I mean, I looked at the standings on Friday when I got home from the game because the Padres had a rough stretch this week. They lost 5 straight games, lost to a lot of bad teams. It started on last Sunday, couldn't complete the sweep. It bled into losing to the Angels, which eventually led into losing to the Diamondbacks on Thursday. And then they finally snapped it and got themselves 1 game under 500 before, obviously, last night. Back to 500. I don't know how many shows I have done where it's like, hey, look, the Padres are at 500. It's been at 500 all year. But I looked at the standings on Friday. It was logjam in the National League wild card. And the Padres actually, surprisingly enough, had the number 2 wild card spot and only 5 games behind Atlanta, who we all know is missing some players for the rest of the season. Ronald Acuna Jr., Spencer Strider, kind of limping around. And then it was Cubs, Reds, Giants, Cardinals, all tied a half game behind San Diego. Pittsburgh, a half game behind those 4 tied teams. Arizona, a game back from those tied teams. Nationals, 2.5 back. And the Mets were only 3 games back, despite being 27-35. It's a tight-knit group. Again, these were Friday standings, not the current ones. Up until today, Padres again, half-game lead on Cincinnati and San Francisco for that final spot. Pirates a half game behind that. Cubs and Cardinals a game out of a wild card. Diamondbacks 2 games. Nationals 2.5. And the Mets are now 4 games back out of the wild card. They're currently playing Philadelphia in London. But that is a log jam. I mean, an absolute log jam of a wild card race. And these series are important when you start breaking it down because there's no more game 163. They don't have that anymore. So you have to win these tiebreakers outright at the end of the year, head to head. You start looking at some of the teams that the Padres are tied with here, that's a good spot. Hey, you know what? If you're going to get swept by a team, get swept by the team that's in last place. Colorado, Anaheim, get swept by American League teams and teams in last that you don't have to worry about. Padres are a half game in front of Cincinnati right now. And again, it's early. The playoffs don't start tomorrow. And we have only played, 68 games. We've only played 68 games. I haven't even got to the 70 mark yet. Less than 100 left. But a half game in front of Cincinnati. Won the season series against Cincinnati. 1 game behind San Francisco in their overall season series against the Giants. Haven't played Pittsburgh yet. Won the season series against Chicago. Behind against St. Louis. Currently leading against the Diamondbacks. Haven't played Washington. Haven't played the Mets. Doesn't really matter what you do against the Rockies. And you're winning the series against the Marlins for the season. Already leading the series against Atlanta this season as well. One more win against Atlanta if you're the Padres. You don't have to worry about them in the standings either because you win the tiebreaker. But I think it's going to continue with this group of teams and nobody really pulling themselves away later in the season. With Atlanta and San Diego, Cincinnati's won 7 straight. San Francisco's going to be hanging around. Pittsburgh is back in the conversation with their young starting pitching. We'll see how long they last throughout the year with some pitch count. Chicago Cubs, they've been kind of going up and down all season. They're 3 games under 500. Cardinals have turned it around as of late, but still 3 games under. I don't think Arizona's that great, but they're still 2 games back, and they're expected to get healthier. And that's honestly where I think it gets cut off. I think the Nationals are just hanging around based on the fact that there's not a lot of teams really pulling away in the National League. So a couple of things to unpack from that. And I got to say this about Mike Shildt. There's a big reason why I don't think I could ever coach baseball because it's just not the mentality. I just can't have that, the mentality of, no, we'll give him tomorrow. Everything's good all the time when it's not. I mean, during that 5-game losing streak, and Mike Shildt's a positive guy. It's almost too positive sometimes. But there's a reason why he's a manager in baseball. It's always been the case. You can't have these rah-rah guys get on everybody all the time and be fire and brimstone. That works more in the college level. That's not really going to work at the pro level too much when these guys are making a ton of money. It'd be like, it's going to fall on deaf ears. There's a time and a place. You only got so many bullets in which you could just unload on your team. And I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Obviously, the players are holding themselves accountable for a lot of different situations. I think the way Mike Shildt does things in the media could be done a little bit differently, but he's overly positive. As a football coach, it's a little bit different. It's more rah-rah. It's getting on your guys. It's going, this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable. Maybe trying to just win every game just because in football with the limited schedule that you have, you are trying to win every game. You're not going to win every game in baseball. I think there's a little bit of a point to what he has to say about, keep winning series. That's great as long as you don't get swept, and that's unfortunately what has happened the last couple of times. They've been swept 3 times this year. Once to a really good team, and now twice to teams in last place. But, despite all of that, he can't be freaking out right now. I think it'd be worse if he was, even though I think we'd love to see him freak out and get on these guys every once in a while. But even with as bad of a week that they had, and they played bad baseball. It wasn't even like they played good baseball, and it didn't go their way. They didn't play good baseball this week. It was bad. Running into outs. They're doing some, bonehead things on the base pass, which we've seen a handful of times. They weren't executing. The pitching wasn't very good, at least in the bullpen. Starting pitching has been pretty good. Starting pitching was great last night, throughout the whole week. All these quality starts that they couldn't get wins for, but now, a couple of wins the last couple of days. But despite all of that, with 2 wins in a row, you're the number 2 wild card team. It's not like they lost any ground. And I think they know that the teams around them are not going to be very good throughout the entire year. They're not teams that you'd be worried about. I said that 2 to 3 months ago. Go through the standings. Who are you afraid of in the National League? Aside from Philadelphia, LA, who, by the way, you have done really well against this year. Milwaukee, who I'm surprised they're still at the top with everything they lost this year or during the offseason. Who, again, you've already taken 2 out of 3 from. The Atlanta Braves, who have a couple of injuries, and the Padres have already taken 3 out of 4 from in Atlanta. Who after those 4 teams are you afraid of in the National League? That Reds team I watched the Padres play is bad. They're not good, and they've won 7 straight. Granted, they're getting a lot of guys back. They were hurt when the Padres played them, but it's not who you play, it's when you play them. And when the Padres played them, they were beat up. They've already won the season series against Cincinnati. I'm not worried about the Reds. Are you worried about the Giants? Not really. They've played bad baseball all year. Now, despite being a run differential of minus 23, they are only 1 game under 500. Bob Melvin's getting the most out of that group, but I'm not afraid of the Giants. You afraid of the Pirates? Not afraid of the Pirates. Cubs, Cardinals, Diamondbacks. I mean, you go down the list. Who are they competing with right now? But now is not the time to be complacent. See, that's a little bit of the difference. I think that's where fans have chimed in and be like, hey, look, hold on, Mike. Hold on, Mike. Let's talk about something for a second. And I know you weren't the manager last year or the last couple of years. You were part of the organization. But we don't want to hear this everything's great conversation when we know it's not great on the field. And last night, I'm going to get to last night. Last night was great. And the night before that was great. But based on the way the team played last year and how it was just kind of just pettering around, just cruising out in Mission Bay on a little paddleboard, just kind of hanging out. All right, what's up? We're going to turn it around. We're going to have a good season. We're going to turn it around. We're going to make the playoffs. And then it just never happened. You lost the trust of a lot of Padres fans. So that's where everybody's coming from on the whole, what's going on, Mike? But I think he's done a pretty good job in the media with that. I mean, there's some times where he's getting to a point where it's, okay, all right, we get it. But you know what? He's got to keep the team positive. And to be honest with you, look at the path. I mean, these guys check the standings. They'll lie to you and say they don't. They check the standings. They're looking around going, I don't think there's anybody there's nobody here that we're afraid of, that we can't already beat. And they've proven so far this year that they could beat some of the best teams in Major League Baseball. And definitely in the National League. Now, the series against the Phillies and the Yankees didn't really go their way, but they've competed with the Dodgers all year, have a season series, overall good numbers against the Dodgers. They've took 2 out of 3 from the Brewers. They've done well against the Braves. I mean, the NL is very mediocre. So they're obviously in a good spot right now. And making the playoffs is their number one concern. I don't necessarily know it's winning the division. I think if they win the division, it's great. But right now, the Dodgers, again, they go on different tears throughout the season. Padres sit 8 games behind them in the standings. Craig brought it up this week on the Andy and Elston show. If they take care of business against teams in last place, instead of being 4-9, or they flip it to 9-4, they're like 2 games out of first place. Or right back into it. It's a frustrating thing. And I think the frustrating thing for a lot of Padres fans can you continue to do this night in and night out and go on a little bit of a streak that you were unable to do last year for the majority of the season, that you have currently been unable to do this year. But why am I setting this up right now of they're in a good spot? Well, here's the deal. We have had the conversation all week about what should the Padres do at the trade deadline. Now, we are still 2 months away from that happening. Probably just under 2 months away from the trade deadline. And I think you got to be going and thinking about what you could do to improve this team. And right now, this team needs a lot. They still have a lot of pieces that they need to be a consistent team. They got a lot of talent that could beat good teams, but it's the lack of talent sometimes that gets them into trouble and why they lose 3 straight times to the Angels. Or don't finish business against the Marlins. Or haven't been able to sweep all year. Going to Atlanta, taking 3 out of 4, and then dropping games to the Colorado Rockies. I mean, that's where they're at. We've said it all season long. You are now 68 games in. You are what your record is. It's 500. They're a 500 team. They could probably use, and I mentioned this on the roundtable, 2 bullpen arms. They could probably use 2 starters, and then you really need a power bat. Can they get all of that under $10 million? That's a major question. Now, a lot of that has to be with the fact that they would have to part ways with a lot of their young talent. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later. But the question of today's show is, should AJ Preller be all in the summer of 2024? There's only so many times you get a crack at this thing and you get an opportunity to go out there and give it your all and go all in on a team. And just because they're not, they don't have the Phillies record doesn't mean they shouldn't be that team this year. You could talk about all these young prospects that you want to come out, and offset the payroll, and we don't want to be terrible past 2026 because of all these contracts are getting bigger. My response to that is, what are you waiting for? You still have to pay those guys anyway. $40 million due to Manny Machado in 2027, 25 for Xander, 25 for Fernando, 20 to Joe, 15 to you, 12 to Jake, 8 to Suarez, assuming he doesn't opt out. 6.5 to Yuki Matsui. Wandy Peralta gets 4.45. That's all in 2027. Obviously, those guys are going to be a lot older. You're going to need some of the young players, but you start looking at some of these young players right now that just came up, that's like arbitration years now. If Jackson Merrill continues to be the player that people expect him to be, his arbitration numbers are going to be pretty good. Now, he's not a power hitter. He's a slap hitter, base hit guy, great with the stick, great defensive fielder. But you really want the pre-arb guys showing up at that time. So right now you're looking at minor league players that are making an impact when they get to the pros in 2027, making their debut in 2027. So some of these players that you're like afraid to part ways with, I got news for you. Whatever's not tied down to the ship, send it. Because you only have so many opportunities where these contracts to Machado, Bogarts, and Fernando make sense. Couple more years out of Fernando, then probably Manny and Xander. But it's time to go for it. You're in the conversation. I've said this a couple of times. You gave Xander Bogaerts $280 million for basically his ages 30 to 34 season. You gave him like 280 over 4 to maybe 5 years. Max. But you can't give him a 4 to 5 year, $280 million contract because it's going to screw up your salary cap, your competitive balance tax. You wouldn't be able to spend on anybody else. You'd be paying all these fees. I mean, $280 million over 5 years, that's a hefty chunk of change. $56 million a year. But you're not paying for him to be 35 to 41. You're paying him for those 5 years. And so if you are paying these guys, I know he's hurt right now, but if you're paying Machado and Bogarts, those two in particular, because Fernando's numbers don't get super high until later on in his career when he's going to be in his prime anyway. But if you're going to pay those guys that kind of money, you have to be all in their prime years. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. Stop worrying about old Machado and Bogarts. We're not there yet. You got to worry about the present. And I'm not saying get rid of DeVries and Salas. But what are you hanging on to some of these prospects for if you are the San Diego Padres? And this is not me talking to the Padres because they're savvy enough, or at least AJ is. He's going to trade anybody that's not tied down. If it means, one, saving his job, and two, getting some more big boppers and top pitching players in this organization. It's more of a question to people that say we should hang on to some of these guys. Now, forget that. You're all in. You decided you were all in when you signed these contracts. That's why last year, and a lot of people want to go hindsight 2020, we should have traded away, Blake Snell and Josh Hader. You can't do that when you have limited years of Manny Machado and Xander Bogaerts and, even Fernando, Joe, you in their prime. Stop worrying about 5 years down the road. You could think about that in a sense with some prospects, but you can't hang on to everybody. Go make your team better. Here's the other thing, too. The San Diego Padres only have $10 million to work with, which means that puts them in the category of trying to find guys that are either making league minimum or they're pre-arb, league minimum, or they're arbitration eligible, and they're not making a lot of money, which means they got years of control. If you decide to go after some of these players, and let's talk about Garrett Crochet for a second. Garrett Crochet, he's not worth a Salas or a DeVries, so let's just shut that down right now. The White Sox, you're dreaming. You're dreaming. That's not what it's going to take to get one of those guys anyway. They're bluffing. They're trying to get as much out in the media as possible what it's going to be to get Garrett Crochet. They're being greedy. They got no leverage. They're supposed to be awful. They got no plan. It's the same thing with the A's who come in this week. They got no plan. And everybody in baseball knows they have no plan, and they're not going to take the bait and overpay for some of these players that the White Sox have. But let's take Garrett Crochet. He's 25 years old. He was a starting pitcher at Tennessee. When he came up to the White Sox, was a bullpen guy in his young ages, coming out of college, right? They're limiting the innings. They could use him in the bullpen. He's hard to hit. He's still trying to figure out how to be a starting pitcher. Last time I checked, Padres have had a pretty good track record on that the last couple of years. Say what you want about Michael King, he's doing a pretty good job. He didn't have really any starting experience before he came over to the Padres. You know who else did it? Seth Lugo. So I wouldn't be so afraid of a guy that's 25 years old potentially being a starter in a couple of years. He's under contract until 2027. You're exchanging possibly young players in your farm system that are pitchers for a more developed version of them. There's no guarantee Adam Major could be like Garrett Crochet. But at least you have this product right here in Garrett Crochet you could probably work with. And by the way, he's going to save you money. He's making $800,000 this year. He ain't going to make a lot next year. And if it is, it's only a couple million. And he's not going to make a lot in 2026 unless he does what? Unless he does something amazing. And then if he does something amazing, you're going to have to pay him. But hey, look, that means you got a phenomenal pitcher. Again, I'm interested in Garrett Crochet. I'm not interested for giving him a top prospect for him. And I don't think the White Sox are going to get a top prospect for Garrett Crochet. He ain't Juan Soto, and he's not Shohei Ohtani. And those were the two biggest trade type options for teams the last couple of deadlines. I think you're all in. I think you're all in. You don't want to hang on to a bunch of these guys. Every farm system in baseball has two players that they're trying to get to the big leagues. Everybody else is just there for practice. That's it. You could talk about all these players all you want. You can go down to the farms and like, oh, look, this guy's great. He was a this round draft pick. This guy. There's two players in the organization the Padres want to get better. It's DeVries and it's Salas. Everybody else, good luck. Padres have already proven that their way of trying to compete is loading up on prospect capital, and shipping them off for developed players ready to go. You're all in right now. You want to know why? Because you made that decision when you signed Manny and you signed Xander Bogaerts and you signed Yu Darvish and you signed this core group of guys. You've already made that decision. So you should be all in, because if they load this team up at the deadline, they could be really scary. They can make a run for it. And there's no guarantee that next year is going to be the same, or the year after that, or the year after that, or even way down the road. And you know what? When you get down to 2027, 2028, there's some guys that are currently just drafted or recently drafted that will be an impact for you at those times. 833-288-0973, 833-288-0973. Want to get your phone calls. What do you think? Should the Padres be all in during this season? They're still sitting at 500. Do you think they need to earn it first? I want to hear your thoughts on the Braden Surprenant Show. 833-288-0973, 833-288-0973. We'll get your phone calls. We'll see what you're talking about in the chat. Thanks again for joining us today on a Sunday morning in June. The Braden Surprenant Show on San Diego's #1 sports station, 97.3 The Fan. Welcome back to the Braden Surprenant Show, live and local each and every Sunday morning. I was off last week, was with USD Baseball as they're up in Santa Barbara. Lost the regional. Tough Sunday last Sunday. Right now the Super Regionals are going on. About 3 or 4 teams have already punched their ticket to Omaha, and we'll see what other teams can do that later on today. That Evansville, Tennessee game last night was pretty impressive. Evansville, a 4 seed, has been making some noise in the NCAA tournament. As a fan of the Tennessee Volunteers, since my brother went there, it was tough. It's tough watching them play because you're starting to fall in love with Evansville. They got some older guys. They're gritty. They hit the ball hard. They're never out of a game because they can score at any point. The pitching's a little bit bad, but it's sitting there telling my brother, I was like, I wish this team was playing somebody else so I could root for them. I wish they were playing like Florida State or some like Texas A&M. Schools that I don't like. So I could see them go to Omaha. But right now, hopefully the Vols could take care of business. College baseball is fun, and the college baseball tournament is a good time. So if you haven't checked that out yet, gives you something else to watch today. We're talking about whether or not AJ Preller should be all in with his team in 2024 in terms of trading prospects and going after some things. I mean, they're like every other team in Major League Baseball at the trade deadline for needs. They need bullpen help, they need starting pitching help, and they need a power bat. And right now, the Padres could really use a lot of those things, but it's going to cost them some serious prospect capital. And I'm curious to see whether or not they're all in or not. I want to get to the phones, though, today, 833-288-0973. We'll talk about some of the comments in the YouTube chat as well. If you haven't done it already, guys on YouTube, guys and gals in YouTube, hit the like button. Be sure to subscribe at B_SURP, at BSURP on YouTube. Driving around, you can also subscribe to 97 Through the Fan on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at B_SURP, BSURP, on all social media platforms. Want to get to the phones? Let's go out to New Jersey. Mitch was upset that I wasn't on the air last week. Mitch, what's going on? How's your Sunday going?
It's going well. How you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing well.
Yeah, usually I walk my grandson, try to get him to sleep, so it's like perfect timing.
Oh, that's great.
So last Sunday it was a nice day. Today's raining. Good stuff here.
What do you got for me today, Mitch?
I hope they can make a serious attempt. We're scoring some runs without Bogus and Manny. Maybe Manny's feelings on the page, but it's always some excuse with him. He might just squeak into the Hall of Fame with his numbers. Maybe they can play a little corporate Raiders. Oakland, the White Sox, get an outfielder, someone that can hit, start every day. And I hope we have more than two good prospects in minor leagues. That's what was disappointing. If you say there's only 2 good ones worth their salt, I thought we had a pretty decent minor league system. And if we don't next year, I hope Soto will be out there. As you know, there's all these big contracts. A lot of these contracts, big superstars, they've gotten hurt. Either just for a couple of weeks or the whole season. It's very peculiar. I don't know what you think, and I think they're being for Soto next year. He's the real deal.
Well, Mitch, I appreciate the phone call. Thanks again for joining the show. It'd be great to have Juan Soto back. It's probably not in their budget. It's not even the Yankees' budget. The Yankees talked about how he's not in their budget because of all these big contracts these teams have dished out, and these big contracts never work. They very rarely work where you get the money value in the talent and production. They're naturally just going to get, worse as age goes on after your prime years. But to go back to what Mitch was saying, I'm not saying the Padres only have 2 prospects, but in general, the minor league system is designed for 2 players to get developed into pro players. Everybody else is just kind of there putting together these practice games. So kids and I'm going to use Fernando, for example, because he's been one of the top prospects. But reality is the minor league system was designed so a guy like Fernando could be a major league player. That's really what it is. And there's a lot of guys that try to go through it, and sometimes they sneak through to the top level, and you get those fun little stories like Mike Piazza was drafted super late, and he made it all the way through. But it's very few and far between. Most of the time, there's a couple of guys, they rush through quick, they develop, and they're at the major league level very soon to impact a major league roster. You could say that about guys like Jackson Merrill. Luis Camposano was one of those guys, some of these top prospects for the Padres. My thing on the here's my thing on the prospects. Again, you look at the top 10 prospects of the Padres, the ones that are probably designed, at least position player wise, to reap the benefits are Ethan Salas and Leotis DeVries. Those are the two players. They're 18 and 17 years old. Their expected arrival time or estimated time of arrival, Salas is kind of early at 2025. Right, but DeVries is not till 2028. Those are the type of players that you want to hang on to counteract these big contracts in 2028 and 2027. Those are the players. It's not Graham Pauley. It's not Ryan Bergert. It's not, Austin Krob. Now, some of these guys are pitchers, and you can never have enough pitching, so I don't know how many pitching prospects I want to give up. It's not, Brandon Valenzuela. He was expected to be up in 2025, catching prospect. He's 23 years old. He's 23 years old. Those are not players that are expected to be the ones counteracting these major contracts. It's right now Salas and DeVries. It's currently Jackson Merrill, who just got pulled up. And to be quite honest with you, it's probably whatever this year's first-round draft pick is and whoever the next big international signing the Padres have that are probably not even part of the system yet. That's why I keep saying it's time to go for it while you're in the middle of the race. Because you never know, one, when you're going to get this opportunity again. Two, you can never really look that far down in the future and think anything's a guarantee. And number three, you want guys during that time to be starting at the major league level, not at the end of it where then you have to make a decision the next year on whether or not you want to pay them. It's kind of like the Atlanta Braves, right? I mean, the Atlanta Braves have done a great job with buying out these players in their rookie deals, give them a couple extra years past their free agent spot. They get bought out of the pre-arb, all the arb years. They get fully guaranteed money. And then when they're 30 years old, they let them walk. And we've talked about this before on the show. I'll continue to talk about it. It's very hard to replicate. But when Ronald Acuna Jr. gets to age 27, or gets to 2027, when he is 30 years old, the Atlanta Braves will make a decision on whether or not they want to pay him $17 million on the club option. I got news for you right now. After 2028, they're going to let him walk. They're going to let him walk. They did the same thing with Dansby Swanson. See ya. They did the same thing with Freddie Freeman. See ya. Guys won him a World Series. They said, we'll see ya. Can't afford you anymore. So guys like Jackson Merrill, you go back to it again. The years that you want to supplement these contracts is really 2027 when you're paying Manny 40 and you're paying Xander 25 and you're paying Fernando 25 and you're paying Joe 20 and you're paying you 15 and Cronenworth 12 and Suarez 8. That's the year you want to start having guys show up. Maybe if Salas shows up in 2026, that'd be great. DeVries, 2027, 2028, that's great. Pre-arb years for them. Then you got 6 years of control for Salas and DeVries during those 6-year time frame. You're overpaying for guys like Machado and Bogarts. It would counteract itself. Let's say Ethan Salas is everything that Major League Baseball expects him to be. And he shows up in 2027 or 2028. He'll probably show up a little bit earlier, knowing the Padres. And he is, what would he be? He's 18 now, 19, 20. He's 21 years old, which would still be insane for a catcher. You have him for 6 years till 2027, or till he's 27 years old, and you'd be paying him league minimum for 3 of those years. You could basically just go, I'm paying him 40 that I'm giving Manny Machado. You could pretend that you're giving Machado league minimum, if that makes sense. So those are the type of players that you want to hang on to. The ones that are estimated time of arrival are 2027, 2028. All these other players, you're going to start making decisions on, and they're going to be ARB eligible by the time that that rolls around, and then you're not really saving any money. You want these guys on their pre-ARB years during that time. So Graham Pauley, you can't be married to that guy. Although I don't think he would get a big number anyway. You're able to send him elsewhere. I think pitching's a little different, but if you give up a starting pitcher like a Snelling or a Lesko and you bring back Garrett Crochet, you basically are advancing and going, I'm turning in a 20-year-old version of Garrett Crochet for the 25-year-old version of Garrett Crochet because I want to win right now, and the 20-year-old is not going to help me as much as the 25-year-old. That's the logic there. Now, whether or not Dylan Lesko and Robbie Snelling are better than Garrett Crochet when they turn 25 will always be the mystery. That's always the thing that you can't have a full guarantee on, but that's what you're trying to do. It's the same thing with, Luzardo, right, with Miami. Like, Jesus Luzardo, he's arbitration eligible the next 2 years. He's a free agent in 2027. So if you bring in Jesus Luzardo at age 26, who's been in the pros for a longer time, and you bring in a guy like Garrett Crochet, and let's say you part ways with Major and Snelling, you are essentially bringing back a more veteran-type player that has been there and done that before over the rookies that are going to try to learn how to pitch at the major league level. So you're essentially exchanging. Now, it's going to cost you more, and there's a lot more factors before people start yelling at me in the chat. But Snelling and Lesko, you're upgrading for Crochet and Luzardo. In a perfect world, money doesn't matter. You're just talking about the players themselves. Who helps? Let me ask you this question before I have to go to break, and we can talk more about what the Padres could do at the deadline in a second. Who helps you more in the next 3 to 4 years? Because that is your window of what you've established by paying these Bogarts and Manning, whatever. In the next 3 to 4 years, who helps you win a World Series more? Is it Snelling and Lesko, or is it Luzardo and Crochet? That's the decision you have to make when you're making these decisions. Is Snelling and Lesko going to be great one day? They might. They might be really good 2028 to 2031. Who knows? But if your window of opportunity is now, and I know you want to be good all the time, you got to go after it and bring in the players, I think, that would be better for you and help you more to win a World Series in these next 3 to 4 years than continue to save time and wait at a later date. Again, I'd love for the Padres to be great all the time. I'd love that. I'd love for them to be like the Cardinals. But the contracts you gave out to Machado and Bogarts don't make sense if you're deciding all of a sudden you're going to play for the future. That's all I'm saying. The question of the day, should AJ Preller be all in this summer when it comes to acquiring talent and making these big trades? I mean, at the station, we're torn half and half. Saw it today. I saw it on the round table on Thursday. Now, Ben's Switzerland in that deal. I don't know what his opinion on it or not. But here's the deal. Me, Annie, and Woods were like, go for it. You got to go for it. Craig and Chris, who have been here a long time, that have seen this team and would want to see this team be good year in, year out, they say, well, hang on, let's pump the brakes. I think they need to be all in. I got a list of 5 players that I think the Padres should be all in on, and who they should trade to get to those spots. And we'll see how much better this team is. I'll let you know who those 5 players are when we come back. This is the Braden Surprenant Show, live and local each and every Sunday morning, San Diego's #1 sports station, 97.3 The Fan. Braden Surprenant show live and local each and every Sunday morning here on San Diego's #1 sports station, 97.3 The Fan. Little June gloom for you this morning. It's funny, like I live in Scripps Ranch, and it's like 50-50 whether or not we get the June gloom throughout the entire day. I mean, downtown and by the coast, you're going to get the June gloom all the time. You're going to get in the marine layer rolling through. When I do the summer workouts with Cathedral, it's hardly ever sunny. It's just this all the time, just overcast. But you go out to East County, I totally forget. Like East County is like that burns off so fast. It's like sunny out there most times than not, and it's like cloudy everywhere else. Always sunny out in East County. I don't know if it is right now. I doubt it. 833-288-0973, 833-288-0973. We're talking Padres baseball. It's better than talking about the NBA Finals. It's better than talking about the NHL, Stanley Cup Finals. I don't think anybody here cares. I mean, if you do, it's great, but majority of the time when we do these weekend shows, nobody's talking about the Padres nationally, right? I mean, even if you're like tuned into like MLB Network Radio this morning, they were probably, I don't know because I wasn't tuned in, they were probably talking about the games in London right now, the Philly-Mets game, which started at 7 in the morning. I mean, there is one game going on right now in Major League Baseball with the Phillies and the Mets, and the Phillies have a 3-0 lead on the Metropolitans in the top half of the 6th. But it's your only place on a Sunday and on the weekends where you could get some Padres talk right here, live and local, each and every Sunday. Again, last Sunday I was off. My apologies. I was with USD Baseball. There'll be a couple other, throughout the year, there's always some things that come up and which I have to miss. But it's good to be back with you guys. And we're talking some Padres questions about the rest of the season. I mean, this week, it's so funny. It's 5-game losing streak. All hell's breaking loose. And on the round table, it's like, well, should they still be all in? I think regardless of what your record is, and I said it last year, you've made that decision. That's not the question anymore. Based on the guys that you decided to pay a lot of money to for a long period of time. The question is now who you're going to go get. And I did ask the question today, should AJ Preller be all in? And when I mean all in, I mean everybody's available. I'd still think the Padres should probably hang on to Salas. I'm not as married to DeVries as much as I am Salas, just because of everything that we have heard so far. But if you can hang on to those two guys and everybody else is on the table, I say you make it happen. And I think you could get a lot of these pieces without having to trade Salas or DeVries. Those are the two guys that are going to be the biggest impacts for you in 2027, 2028 range anyway. Why is that range significant? That is the time period where you are no longer in the prime window of Bogarts and Manny. And you can argue all you want that they're not in it right now. Go ahead. But this is what you paid them for, were these years up until that point where they start getting big money, and now they're old, making big money. You supplement that by having young guys making almost nothing, and that counteracts your budget. So then you could be saying, I'm paying Ethan Salas $40 million, and I'm paying Manny Machado league minimum. I mean, it's the same, whatever way you want to skin a cat. There's multiple ways to skin a cat. Multiple ways to do things. But you're looking at those are the type of prospects that you want. The ones that are showing up 2027, 2028, and then you have 6 years of control past that to the point where all those guys are becoming free agents. The older guys are becoming free agents. So when they're coming off the books, is at the same time these young guys would probably need a contract, or you could give them the contract past those years. And so you don't have to make this big decision and be like, well, we can't give this guy a new contract because there's still 2 years left of Manny and I'm paying him $40 million. I think that's the reason why a lot of these younger players have been traded the last couple of years, because they know that that window is the same and you're trying to win now. I also think there is a certain type of player that the Padres would be after at the trade deadline anyway. I'm going to give you the list of the players that I think the Padres should go after that fit this criteria. in the 9 o'clock hour. Also want to get to your phone calls. 833-288-0973. 833-288-0973. Kathy, please stay on hold. We'll take it to the next break. I'm Braden Surprenant. This is the Braden Surprenant Show, live and local each and every Sunday morning on San Diego's #1 sports station, 97.3 The Fan. Hour number 2 and final hour of the Braden Surprenant Show, live and local each and every Sunday morning. Thanks again for making our day a part of yours. If you're on YouTube, give us the like on the YouTube stream. Sure to keep commenting on the video as well. talking about Padres payroll, talking about whether or not the Padres should be all in this season in terms of the trade deadline. It's an interesting question. Seems to be kind of back and forth on whether or not the Padres should or not. And hello to all of you in the chats. I've been reading all your comments or trying to catch up on as many of them as possible. Follow me on social media at B_SURP, at BSURP. I'm on X, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at all of those. You can watch this on my YouTube page. You can watch it on the 97 Through the Fan YouTube page. We're streaming on Twitch, on Facebook, on Twitter, of course, or X, whatever it is. I'm also on my Instagram account for all of you that might be at home and watching on your phone, scrolling through, waking up, trying to see what's going on. Early on a Sunday. It's good to be here. Good to be part of your guys' day talking some Padres baseball. Big win for the Padres last night. Hammered the Arizona Diamondbacks. Got contributions from pretty much everybody. Got some pop out of some players as well. Starting to heat up a little bit. Ball starting to fly a little bit. Matt Waldron, another great outing out of him, who's been on a tear. Ruben Niebla has done great work with Matt Waldron. Very serviceable 5-spot. And you know what? He finally got some run support. Got in a big way. Padres had 3 4-run innings last night as they went on to beat the Diamondbacks 13-1. Back to 500. Where have we heard that before? It's a team that's very talented, still has a lot of holes. Still a lot of holes in this Padres roster, which asks the question, should the Padres be all in at the deadline? I think a lot of people get afraid of that because of 2020, where the Padres were all in and made about 1,500 moves and still ran out of pitching. I think this year it's a little bit different. I think their starting pitching is serviceable for the most part. When you got Cease and you've had some great starts out of some of these guys, the injuries have been a little bit of a problem. But overall, if you want to make this team better, I think they have to acquire 5 players or positions, which is a lot. But knowing AJ Preller, the wheeler and dealer that he is, doesn't seem that crazy that he wouldn't be able to do this. Now, I think the Padres need 2 more bullpen arms. Now, I think Estrada and Suarez have been great. I mean, the back end of the bullpen's been great. You know, Estrada got hit around the other night a little bit on Thursday. But he has been great as a setup guy, and Suarez has been great as a closer. But that kind of middle ground is where the Padres have had some issues. And I think the Padres should acquire probably 1 to 2 more bullpen pieces. Again, this all could change before the deadline, but as of right now, some of the holes that they have, and we're trying to get them to not be 500, right? I mean, they've been 500 the whole year. It's been a lot of up and down. I know some people take exception to the roller coaster philosophy, but if you continue to stay around 500 and go on these 5-game losing streaks, and then and then 2 out of 3, 2 out of 3, 2 out of 3, you're on a roller coaster. I'm sorry to tell you that. But with the way the National League is set up right now and how nobody's really taking charge in this wild card race, and I know it's June, but it's starting to play itself out. You got a lot of teams tied in the wild card standings. And the Padres right now have the number 2 wild card spot, surprisingly enough. Only 4 games back from Atlanta for the top wild card spot. And they played poor all week. And they're back to 500. That's how tight the National League is and how poor the National League has been playing. So the Padres are right there in the thick of things. It's not like they're 500 right now and 4 games out of a wild card spot or 5 games out of a wild card spot, and you're really grasping at straws to try to put yourself in a playoff race. I mean, they're in the thick of it right now. And in 1 month's time, it's probably going to be around the same. Hopefully they have a little bit more ground. But they want to be able to separate themselves from the rest of the pack in the National League wild card and be in that top echelon with the 4 teams that I already think are going to make the playoffs now pending injury with the Atlanta Braves. Those 4 teams would be the Philadelphia Phillies, the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Milwaukee Brewers, and the Atlanta Braves. Padres need some help if they want to hang with those teams. Done a pretty good job playing the Dodgers and the Brewers so far. Phillies outclassed them when they came to town. Phillies are at a different level. The same thing with the New York Yankees at that point in time as well. But you got to be able to put yourself in that category if you want to go for it. If you don't want to go for it, then forget it. Then you could punt on the season again and waste another year of prime Bogarts and Machado, and I know they're both hurt. But there's only so many bullets that those guys have left in the next 3 to 4 years. And you gave them that gigantic contract for these 3 to 4 years, 4 to 5 years, not for them to be playing at age 40 or age 38 or age 37 or beyond 2028. And that's why we had that conversation in the last hour. Who are the type of players the Padres should be going after? Well, let me categorize it by I think they need 2 bullpen arms, I think they need 2 starters, and I think they need a power bat. Relief pitching, starting pitching, and power bat. I mean, however many you want to get per each, I think that's kind of a good starting spot for them. If they get one of each, I think that'd be serviceable as well. But the question earlier today was, how in should AJ Preller be? I think they should be all in. Anything that's not tied down to the ship should be getting thrown overboard for more help. Let's talk about the 2 bullpen pieces. Actually, what I really should phrase is, this is the type of player you're looking for. So I'm going to come up with 5. If you want to start throwing out some ideas, by all means, 833-288-0973, 833-288-0973. You can put it in the chat as well. Padres have a very tight, say budget, but kind of parameters. It's almost like you're searching for players. On the search bar, you have to fill these things out and try to narrow it down. You're looking for, obviously, players that are on a bad team. Right? Teams at the deadline that are going to trade with you are teams that are really bad. I mean, really bad. That aren't playing for a playoff spot. So if you pull up the standings, who are the teams that are really bad? Let's start with them. Oakland's really bad. They're also not really trying to win. So they've played a lot better than I think a lot of people were expecting. They're not the worst team in Major League Baseball. They're not even the worst team in the American League. They're playing better than expected, but they're 8 games out. They're 26-40. They're in the process of moving to Sacramento. Their owner doesn't care. They're not trying to win. That's a good spot. They're going to be selling at the deadline. Los Angeles Angels, 9 games back out of the wild card. They're 24-40. They're lousy, even though they swept the Padres this week. I'm done talking about that. They're 3-7 in their last 10. Those 3 wins are all against the Padres. Take that for what it's worth. They got no plan either. They're not going anywhere. They'll sell. Whether or not they have anything to sell will be different. Chicago White Sox are way out of it. They've been the worst team all year. I don't think the Astros are out of it, despite them being hurt. I don't think they're going to part ways with a lot of different players. Rangers are coming off a World Series. They're 4 games under. I think Toronto's interesting, but they're still relatively in the conversation at 2 games out of a wild card spot. But out of the American League, it's the A's, the Angels, and the White Sox. In the National League, it's probably the Nationals, the Mets, the Rockies, and the Marlins. I know the Nationals are 2.5 games back, but we'll cast the wider net. So you have 4 teams in the National League that are probably going to be sellers. Nationals, Mets, Rockies, Marlins. And you got about, we'll say, 3 teams in the American League that are definitely going to be sellers at the deadline. A's, Angels, and White Sox. That's your starting point. The next part of criteria for the San Diego Padres is, I don't really think they need so much players with years of control. I think it's better. I don't think that's necessarily the case. But you have to be able to get these players and stay underneath $10 million. You got $10 million to work with because they want to stay underneath the competitive balance tax. So in order to do that, they can't spend more than roughly, give or take, $10 million at the trade deadline. So you're looking for players that are on league minimums. You're looking for players that are arbitration. You're looking for those younger players that don't have these big deals. Or guys that were rentals out of the gate that didn't get a big contract that are playing out of their minds this year. One of those hot players that see, like a Brandon Drury type from a couple of years ago. or at the time in Austin Nola, which I know we don't really want to see that again. I think you could take it a step further. I think it would be better for the Padres. At this point in time, they can't take major risks with some of these guys. It's time to either get somebody that has had a track record before, and it's not just a one-and-done season on a rental, over a player that might just be getting hot right now, like Austin Nola was in 2020. So with that set of criteria, I think it's a bonus if you have a couple years of control. Because remember, that's the window I said is about 3 to 4 years left of Machado and Bogarts guaranteed, which nothing's guaranteed, but at least logically you could say you're going to get really good production out of those two players over the next 3 to 4 years. If they're better after that, you're playing with house money. So that's kind of the criteria. Let's start looking at some of these players. Again, you need some bullpen help, you need starting pitching help, and you need a big bat. I think the big bat's going to be hard to come by. I think you're going to have to take a chance on somebody. So I'm going to get to that in a little bit. But I think bullpen help-wise, and already, the A's, just like the White Sox and the media, a couple of weeks ago said that if you want Mason Miller, it's going to cost you Jackson Merrill. I laugh at that. Ha ha. Very funny. A's, nobody's taking you seriously. I'm going to call your bluff right now. Even if the Padres decide to give the A's Jackson Merrill, what is their plan? What are they trying to do? I mean, Jackson Merrill's already up in the big leagues, right? So he's going to be a free agent in 2028, if I'm not mistaken. No, 2030. At what point are the A's going to be competitive? Like, when are they trying to be competitive? In Sacramento, or like when they magically make it to Vegas, which might not be until 2027, 2028? And at that point, where he's going to be at, he's going to be making too much money. So that doesn't make any sense. But guys way down the road might make a lot more sense. The two players in particular that I think would be worth a while for the Padres in terms of bullpen help would be Lucas Erceg and Mason Miller. Now, obviously, that's not really going on a limb. They're two players that are some of the best bullpen arms in Major League Baseball. Mason Miller has already had a Tommy John issue in the past. And a very interesting story of Mason Miller. He was a guy that in high school didn't know he was a diabetic, and then when they figured it out and he was able to get the treatment he needed, turned into a phenomenal player. Coming from a small school in college, he's 25 years old. He's in his 25-year season here in 2024. He's under control until 2030, just like Jackson Merrill is. I'm not saying trade Jackson Merrill for Erceg or Miller, but these are two guys that are, Erceg's a little bit older, but they're making league minimum this year and next year. They're arbitration eligible 2026, 2027, 2028. And they're ARB 4 in 2029, which is really rare. So you get 5.5 years of control for Erceg and Miller for anybody you decided to trade them. What do the A's need those players for in the future? They have no future. They're not trying to win. They're not trying to win in the next 3 or 4 years. I mean, Lucas Erceg's already 29 years old. He just turned 29. He'll be a free agent when he's 34. What are you using him for if you're Oakland? I don't think you need to trade up. I don't think you need to trade DeVries or Salas for one of those guys. I think you could get them both for some arms in the like a decent prospect, top 10 prospect, and a couple of arms in like low A ball to replace Miller and Erceg. I think those would be good targets for the Padres. Somebody's like, well, you already have a closer. And? How nasty would that bullpen be if you got Erceg available in the 6th inning and Estrada in the 7th and Miller in the 8th and Suarez in the 9th? That's a legendary bullpen. That is a playoff-winning bullpen. Those are some bullpen arm help. I don't think they're going to take on any money. It is the A's, but you never know what you might be able to give up in that sense. Maybe you give up a decent prospect and they take Yuki Matsui off your hands. Or they build a team around Hassan Kim. That doesn't make sense. Never mind. Maybe they want a Matt Waldron, starting pitcher. I think that would kind of counteract exactly what you're trying to accomplish. But those would be my two targets for relief pitcher. Is that shooting for the moon? Yes, it is. I don't think you're going to have to give up too many players for that. So those are the first two that I would put on my list. Bullpen arms. Ursig, Miller, the A's. Let's go back to this. Who else is bad? That would be Miami. Miami is bad. Miami, we already know that AJ Preller can fleece in a trade since they were able to get a rise for basically nothing. And Miami paid for his contract. Amazing. And then they took Woo-Suk Go off their hands. That they still have to pay $1.75 million this year and $2.25 next year. As he's loose in Major League Baseball and a free agent. But let's go back to the Marlins for a second. Everybody keeps talking about Luzardo. The Padres have called about Luzardo. I think that's where you go after a starting pitcher. By the way, those contracts that I said again, a league minimum for both Ursig and Miller. Everything's prorated too by the time that you get them. So you'd only have to pay, 40% of their contract at that point in time. 40 to 45%. So 40%, you guys could do the math, of $740,000 is basically where you're sitting at. $740,000 for league minimum. You'd only have to pay them $296 each. So your budget's $592 million or $592,000 right now. You're well underneath that $10 million. Let's talk about Luzardo. Luzardo's been rumored to be in the conversation the Padres have talked about. That was during those Luis Arraez conversations. Jesus Luzardo is making $5.5 this year. He's ARB eligible next year. He's ARB eligible in 2026, and he's 27 years old at the end of the season. Years of control, not making a lot of money, young player, perfect fit on a very bad team, perfect fit for the Padres. He's making 5.5 right now, which is not a lot. You'd only have to pay him 2.2 plus the 596 from Ursig and Miller. Your budget right now is at $2.796 million. Staying underneath the competitive balance tax. I've gotten you a starting pitcher, and I've gotten you 2 bullpen arms. Again, we haven't traded anybody yet. There hasn't been any guys sent. Obviously, it's not just fair trades off on MLB The Show. But other players that fit that spot. Next player on the list. Let's go back to the Chicago White Sox. Let's talk about what they have to offer. Now, the Chicago White Sox have a lot of interesting players on their list. They have, a power bat in Tommy Pham, a hard-nosed player. We know about Tommy Pham. He's been here before. He's only getting $2.5 million. It's $3 million prorated on a 1-year deal. It's a free agent at the end of the year. I don't necessarily know if I'm super into that or not. But you have Tommy Pham available. I think it's more interesting about a Garrett Crochet move. Garrett Crochet, a young pitcher at 25, making $800,000. Check. On a very bad team. Check. Years of control. Check. I don't think you need to give up Solis or DeVries for him either. Because, again, the more the players that flood the market, the less valuable some of these guys will be to some of these teams. What are the White Sox doing? Are the White Sox competing in the next 2 or 3 years? The answer is no. So Garrett Crochet is another player that is a luxury they can't afford. Might as well start building for the future. $800,000. Again, prorated. You're not going to have to spend a lot of money on Garrett Crochet. It fits a lot of different categories. You're at $3 million if you acquire Crochet. I know some people have said, what about Michael Kopech? I mean, that's another option. He's 28 years old. He's making $3 million this year. ARB next year, free agent 2026. I think you could get a big deal with the White Sox for some of these players. Now, big bopper types, Luis Robert Jr., he's been hurt. He's getting 12.5 this year. I don't think he's part of your budget. I think you'd have to go for more of a Tommy Pham type with the White Sox. If you want to stay under budget, I'm not necessarily sure that does anything for you offensively, but I do think you need a bat. That's another one. So you got Crochet, you got Luzardo, Ursig, Miller. Those are all 4 pitchers that you can acquire that fit a lot of different categories. In terms of power bats, this is where you run into a little bit of a problem. But that being said, you've only spent $3 million. So you still roughly have $7 million, give or take, to spend on some players that might be big bats. I know a lot of people have talked about Brent Rooker. I think he's an interesting conversation. Brent Rooker used to be part of the Padres organization for a little bit of time. But I don't know. Is Brent Rooker a player that can keep it going the entire year? Maybe you throw Brent Rooker in that deal. He is hitting 272. He's got 12 home runs this year. He hit 30 home runs last year. I mean, he would be one of those big bat types for the Padres. I don't necessarily know if that really moves the needle. But they definitely need to find a power bat. Let's just say Brent Rooker to keep it simple with the trade. So you get 3 players from Oakland, you get 1 from Chicago, and you get 1 from Miami. You get 2 starting pitchers, you get 2 bullpen arms, and you get a power bat. All of those players, by the way, are under control for the next couple of years. Ursig and Miller under control until 2030. Brent Rooker is under control until 2028. Garrett Crochet is under control until 2027. And Jesus Luzardo is under control until 2027. So the fear is you give away some of these young prospects, right, that are going to counteract this team in the future, but you've replaced them with veteran players that have been there and done that before, that are also under control, that are not making a lot of money, that counteract those big-time contracts. Want to know what you have to say? 833-288-0973, 833-288-0973. I'll read some of your comments during the break. We'll get your phone calls when we come back. This is the Braden Surprenant Show, live and local each and every Sunday morning on San Diego's #1 sports station, 97.3 The Fan. Welcome back to the Braden Surprenant Show, live and local each and every Sunday morning. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube at B_SURP. I'm here every Sunday, or at least almost every Sunday. Missed last week, back. But having a good conversation with all of you, trying to upgrade this Padres team. They're right there in the thick of things, man. Up there in the thick of things with the way the National League is playing out. I think the Padres need to be all in. What do you say? 833-288-0973, 833-288-0973. Let's go to Kathy in Los Angeles. Wants to weigh into the show. Kathy, thank you for patiently waiting on hold. How's your Sunday going?
It's going pretty good, Braden, and hopefully both my teams will win today like they have the last couple days. But, I've been watching this team for a long time. And just in the last few years, we actually had an owner that was willing to spend money on our team. I think we should be all in just because we have the team that can get to the playoffs. They're starting to hit better. I mean, what was it, just like a week ago, people were upset about Tatis. Now he's hit, 8 games in a row? And so we're starting to get the production that we've been expecting. The only big problem is, like you said, there's going to be a lot of teams out there that are going to be wanting these players. I mean, I think the Dodgers have issues in their bullpen because they haven't gotten all their pitchers back. But, even teams like the Royals are looking at the exact same players that the Padres are in their bullpen. So there's going to be a lot of competition, but I'm not willing to give up, some of our top prospects. I don't want to give up Ethan Salas. Why would we? It'd be ridiculous.
Well, I don't think Ethan Salas is touchable at all, to be honest with you. I can't imagine the Padres. Here's what I think the Padres are probably doing. It's like, you can go do what you want, AJ, but there's a couple of things. Stay underneath the competitive balance tax, and you can't give up Ethan Salas, which I think is fine. DeVries, I think you're more susceptible of trading DeVries than you are Salas right now. But again, even though there are going to be a lot of teams that are looking for players, and there's going to be a lot of other players that come on the market that are available. There's a decent amount of players that, teams like the Blue Jays are willing to shop that cost a little bit more in terms of their salary that I think these teams would be interested in. Vlad Guerrero Jr. is one of those names that has popped up before. They've talked about Bo Bichette. These are other players that the Padres, it doesn't really fit them either. And there could be some players that are out there on some mediocre teams or decent teams that teams want to sell because they're going to be free agents at the end of the year, or those rental type pieces that you don't see, and those might be targeted by some of the bigger organizations in Major League Baseball. But I kind of like what AJ Preller's been doing so far this year, and he hasn't waited to the deadline. He has struck early and went and got Luis Ariz and went and got Dylan Cease so they could gel with the team and be part of it. They know what the holes are, and they've addressed 2 of them so far this year before the deadline. Because why wait if you know what the problems are with your organization? Kathy, I appreciate the phone call. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you next week.
Okay, have a good rest of your weekend, Braden. Go.
Kathy, always a great phone call. She is right. There's going to be a lot of competition for these guys. And we're going to see who else comes. There's always players that become available. I know Adam Klug has thrown out the idea of Danny Jansen. Danny Jansen's a free agent at the end of the year. He's a catcher that's got a little bit of bat to him. And your catching position is another area that has hurt the team. But the thing is with, I don't know what you're going to find that's better than Luis Campusano over the next 4 years or 3 years or until Salas comes up. He's under control. He's not getting paid a lot of money. I think you need to work with him to get him to where you need to be. Because as much as we have talked about some of these young players that are supposed to help facilitate these big contracts, he is one of those players until Salas comes out, and he has not done what I think a lot of Padres fans have wanted to see him do, and it's already, we need to go find a catcher. Well, how many of these prospects we want to hang on to come up and play like Luis Camposano or come up and not play that well in their first couple of years, are you willing to just be like, yep, we got rid of him. He sucks. I mean, you can't do that. You have to stick to the plan of where we're going to keep this guy around. They're not all going to come up and be Fernando. They're not all going to come up and be Ronald Acuna Jr. They're not all going to come up and be Bryce Harper. You might get one, maybe two, and some teams have done a really good job of bringing up a lot of players, but you're not always going to hit on some of these guys, even the ones that are for sure major league stars. I mean, you've gotten a lot of good play out of Jackson Merrill so far, but Corbin Carroll had a great year last year, and this year he's been awful. I mean, the Padres got him going a little bit, but Corbin Carroll has not been anything near what he was last season, and that's not saying he's a bad player, but you have to expect that eventually it's going to happen for some of these young guys coming up. I mean, Carroll's hitting $199 this season. He won the Rookie of the Year last year, hitting .285. It's his third year now in the big leagues. Only played 32 games in 2022, but it's his third year in the big leagues, and he's hitting $199 and has a 67 OPS plus. I mean, it can happen to any of these players that we want to hang on to and save and pretend like they're going to be these stars all the time. They're not always going to be these big stars. You just hope that they can. But my train of thought is if you're in the contention right now and you're part of the conversation of making the playoffs, wouldn't you want to give your current team the best opportunity to potentially win in the postseason by filling some of the holes that you have? I mean, the Padres should have filled some of these needs during the offseason. They didn't. And they have been a team the last 3 or 4 years that has tried to cram for their test and load up at the trade deadline. But again, as I mentioned before, the National League ain't getting any better overnight. And the Padres right now are 4 games behind Atlanta for the top wild card spot and 8 games behind the Dodgers for the number 1 spot in the National League West, a team that they have competed with all year. If they could just take care of business against some bad teams, they'd be right there in the thick of things. I think they just need a couple more. They need some help, and they got to be able to go after some help. 833-288-0973, 833-288-0973. We've talked about some of the players I think the Padres should acquire. How does that affect the lineup? We'll talk about that when we come back on the Braden Surprenant Show, live and local each and every Sunday morning. San Diego's number 1 sports station, 97.3 The Fan. Final segment of the Braden Surprenant Show. We're here each and every Sunday morning, live and local, talking Padres baseball on San Diego's #1 sports station, 97.3 The Fan. Be sure to follow us on social media, B_SURP. You can follow me at that. You can follow 97.3 The Fan. If you haven't, give us a like on the YouTube page as well. As we're talking some Padres trades. Are the Padres all in? That's the big question. I think the Padres are definitely all in this season. I would hate to see Ethan Salas leave. I think that is the one untradeable piece of this team. I think DeVries is a little bit more available than others. And my biggest thing on that is he's a little bit younger, obviously, but it's so valuable to have a catcher that could do it all, right? And Salas is apparently the guy that is the catcher that could do it all. What do the Padres need? Yet again, add it to the list because everybody keeps saying they need a catcher now. Need back to a catcher. What are you going to do? I mean, Kyle Higashioka is a backup catcher. He's always been a backup catcher. I mean, that's just what he is. Backup catchers don't hit for a high average. They do a pretty good job defensively. Every once in a while, they'll run into one. I think Kyle Higashioka has done his job as being a backup catcher. As for Luis Campusano, it's a little concerning that he's only hitting .234 right now with a negative WAR and an 87 OPS plus. He's obviously a player that needs to get it going. He's not one of those players, by the way, that is a defensive first player. I mean, you've seen that with guys that the Padres have had in the past with Austin Hedges. Austin Hedges was a catcher, defensive catcher first, not really hitting second because he's never really been able to hit at the major league level. I mean, he has just been awful at the plate. But a guy like Luis Campusano, he was expected to be a guy that's got a stick, and he hasn't really had that so far this season. It's his first opportunity to finally get everyday starting catching reps. And he's still very young. He's only 25 years old. It's very difficult to play at a high level at the major league level as a catcher and learning learning all the staffs and focusing on the defensive aspect that's on top of being able to swing the bat. Last year in just 49 games, he hit .319. It was great, but he wasn't the everyday starter, battled some injuries. We've seen that a couple of times so far in Campusano's career. Made his debut in 2020 as a 21-year-old. He's 25 now. He's only played in 57 games out of the 68, 197 plate appearances, a .234 average, 643 OPS. Padres need to find a way to get Luis Campusano going. And everybody's like, well, you got to find a catcher, There's not a lot of catchers to go around that have the ability to hit and catch. It's very few and far between. It's guys like Adley Rutschman and Salvador Perez. And that's kind of it. I mean, you can go down, there's some others, obviously, but there's not a lot when it comes to the catching position. You either get a really good defensive catcher or you get a really good offensive catcher. And the ones that exist, and they are unicorns, they are on really good baseball teams. They're on some of the best, right? Like JT Realmuto in the Phillies, right? He's a guy that is one of the best catchers. He's on one of the best teams. They're not going to trade him. Adley Rutschman, one of the best catchers on one of the best teams. You start going through some of these teams that are in first place, they got really good catchers. Will Smith, really good catcher defensively, really good offensively. I know Padres fans don't like him because of what he said about Jurickson Profar, which is true. That's I can understand why you would not like Will Smith. I'm not a huge fan of Will Smith either, but talent-wise, he is one of the best. He is on the Los Angeles Dodgers. I mean, start looking at the standings. You'll start finding some of the best catchers in Major League Baseball. So it's not like they could go find one right now throughout the big leagues. The one that you would get is the one in Ethan Salas who is hanging around in your minor leagues. That is the guy that you could pretend that is your future. There's not a lot of him to go around. Shortstops, We know there's a lot of those. The Padres have a lot of those in a lot of different positions. So if I'm only keeping one, almost like it's an expansion draft, you got to protect somebody. The only one I'm protecting right now is Ethan Salas. Nobody's allowed to touch him. I think he does more for the Padres over the next 10 to 15 years than anybody you would ever acquire. I think you're better off with him for a World Series caliber team. He's not going to be that far off from joining the big league club. I don't think you can trade him. I think he has to be part of the organization. I think he needs to be part of the future of this team. That would be a player that I would be upset about for any trade. If the Padres sent Ethan Salas anywhere, even for any of those 5 players that I mentioned, I think it would be a loss for the Padres. But I think he might be the untouchable piece. Everybody thought C.J. Abrams was kind of that untouchable piece, but the Padres didn't want to trade, didn't mind trading Abrams because they had Jackson Merrill right behind. And Jackson Merrill might be that guy. Hopefully, he could put on some muscle here in the future and be a little bit more of a, get some more pop in him. And I think he's going to naturally get some more pop. He's going to be a really good player. But the Padres traded Abrams because they knew they had Merrill in their back pocket. You don't have Salas. I mean, Salas is a freak in comparison to the rest of the catching markets or catching prospects. You don't want to lose him. There's nobody worth trading for him unless it's like one of the big names. But that would be ridiculous. So I would imagine DeVries is probably the option for the Padres that they might part ways with over Salas. They'll never get rid of both. If the Padres get rid of both Salas and DeVries, they're super desperate to win this year. Or AJ Preller is super desperate to win this year. But I don't see that happening. It's been a fun show today. Good talking Padres baseball with all of you. We wanted to talk about, some people had in the chat, they were asking about, what do you do with the roster if you acquire these guys? So, I mean, obviously with Miller and Urseg, it's, a lot of the Padres. I think you have to start parting ways with some of these players. I think they'd have to be part of the packages sent out. I think it's hard to find some pieces that these other teams would want. Because, guys like Hassan Kim, it's not like they're under control where you could turn them around and he could be your starting shortstop for very long. I mean, I saw in the chat, it was interesting that somebody brought up trading Matt Waldron. To me, that's an interesting topic of discussion because Matt Waldron has been on a heater right now. He's been outstanding for the Padres the last couple of weeks. He's been a great 5th starter. But with the injuries that the Padres have, you can never have too much pitching. It's almost like kind of counterproductive to send away another pitcher in order to bring one back. The interesting part of that conversation, though, is when the playoffs come around, Matt Waldron doesn't really have a job because he's not really a bullpen piece. He's more of a starter, and I don't necessarily know the Padres would be starting him in a playoff game with, a season on the line or, trying to get to the next round. I mean, your playoff pitchers are guys that you've seen all year. It's like Yu Darvish and Joe Musgrove and Dylan Cease and Michael King. I mean, those are your playoff-type pitchers. If you go and acquire a couple more, let's say you get Garrett Crochet or you get a Luzardo. I mean, those guys are pitching in playoff games. Matt Waldron is not. Matt Waldron has done his job this year, but he's not the one pitching in a playoff game. And if he's not a bullpen guy as a knuckleballer, coming in inheriting runners, then what do you use him for, right? Maybe he is of value to get some of these players. Would you exchange a Matt Waldron for another starting pitcher? I don't know. I'd have to get at least 2 starting pitchers back in different deals or make sure I am adding a starting pitcher. So you would get rid of Waldron. Let's say you get rid of Waldron, you bring on Luzardo, and you bring on Garrett Crochet. I still think it's counterproductive for you because of the injuries of Darvish and Musgrove. Because if Musgrove and Darvish are lost for the year, which they're not, but if they get hurt again and you don't have them in the playoffs, then you're back to, well, we don't have enough guys to pitch, which is what the problem was for the Padres in 2022 in the playoffs and was the problem for the Padres in 2020 in the postseason. So it's a very interesting topic of discussion on that, trade high on some of these players. But I think starting pitching is tough to do because I think those are a little counterproductive. Unless you think you could get some young kid, unless it's a situation where you can send Matt Waldron off and then be able to keep a Snelling or a Major. But even then, I don't know if it's the right move. Laid out a lot of moves today. Talks of Padres baseball. Padres game's getting underway at 1:10 today Pacific time, trying to take 3 out of 4 from the Arizona Diamondbacks. Got the Oakland Athletics coming to town for the next 3 days, and then the New York Mets. It should be a time for the Padres to really rack up some wins. Where have we heard that before? Be nice to be above 500. We'll see what the Padres got in store for us today. That'll do it for me, as we will get you ready for Padres pregame show, which won't start until 12:10 Pacific time. The EcoWater SoCal pregame show with Sam Levitt. Get you ready for Padres and Diamondbacks. It's Mago for the Diamondbacks. Scott Mago, 1-3 of the 6.35 ERA. Right-handed pitcher going against Adam Major of the San Diego Padres, who has yet to factor into decision. It's a 1.5 ERA after his first start against the Angels last week. Hopefully he has another good outing as he starts his second start at the major league level. Be sure to follow us on social media at B_SURP, at BSURP. Be sure to like us on the YouTube if you have not already. We're going to have a good week this week as the Padres will play, as I mentioned, Oakland and the New York Mets. All of our shows will get underway tomorrow with Ben and Wood starting at 6 a.m., Annie and Elston going from 10 to 2, and Gwen and Chris going from 2 until the pregame show at 5:40 coming up tomorrow. That'll do it for me on the Braden Surprenant Show. Thanks again for tuning in. Padres baseball coming up later on San Diego's #1 sports station, 97.3 The Fan. Talk to you guys next week for another edition of the Braden Surprenant Show, live and local each and every Sunday morning, right here on 97.3 The Fan.